In life, we're often told to give 100%, to push as hard as we can until we've reached our maximum effort. But what if I told you that the idea of giving 100% is just not that simple? It's not a reflection of your true potential. It's an artificial ceiling created by systems like education, the media, and economic policies. These systems have defined what they believe you're capable of, and most of us unknowingly accept it. The truth is, these ceilings are not about your capabilities. They exist to maintain control, to keep you from pushing beyond the boundaries set for you. I learned this firsthand as a teacher in 1994. My students had limitless potential, but the barriers in front of them weren't just mental. They were built into the very structure of the education system itself. The textbooks my students used were outdated, filled with half-truths and omissions. Their history was being erased, their potential stunted by a curriculum that wasn't designed to uplift them but to hold them in place. I couldn't sit by and watch this happen. So, I brought in Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. This wasn't just a book, it was a new way of seeing the world. For the first time, my students were seeing themselves reflected in history. They learned about America through the lens of the marginalized and oppressed, rather than the victors. But the moment I introduced that book, I met resistance. The administration didn't want to update the textbooks. These books are good enough, they said. But good enough for whom? Good enough for students who had been failed by the system year after year? The resistance wasn't just about a book. It was about control over what these students were allowed to learn, and by extension, control over what they were allowed to believe about themselves. Think about this. Who defines what you're capable of, and why have you accepted those limits? The classroom as a battleground. Every decision an educator makes has the potential to either open doors or close them. And for my students, those doors were being slammed shut by a system that refused to change. The textbooks they were using were relics of a bygone era, filled with biased versions of history that erased their stories. So when I introduced new materials, like Zinn's text, I wasn't just teaching them history, I was teaching them how to see themselves in that history. But here's the harsh truth. When you challenge the system pushes back. This wasn't just resistance from one school, it was a systemic problem. By keeping those outdated textbooks, by refusing to acknowledge the need for change, the education system was telling my students that their experiences didn't matter. And when you internalize that message, it becomes a part of your identity. You start to believe that you're only capable of so much, that you've reached your limit and there's nowhere else to go. I call this educational McCarthyism. It's a quiet blacklisting of ideas that challenge the dominant narrative. In the 1950s, McCarthyism was used to silence those who questioned the political status quo. Today, it's used to silence educators who want to teach the truth. It's not just about what's in the textbooks, it's about who controls the narrative. And this isn't just happening in classrooms. This same process occurs across society, in politics, in the media, in our workplaces. The boundaries of what's possible are set, and we are told we can't go any further. We are told that we have reached our maximum, that we've hit the threshold of what defines our potential. But what if those limits are just tools of deception to sway you from the truth? What if you've been taught to stop right before your breakthrough? What happens when there's more for you to achieve, but your progress is purposefully stifled? Systemic barriers in education are hidden in plain sight. There's a myth that education has evolved. We're told that things have improved, that students today have more opportunities than ever before. But the reality is, the system is still rigged, especially for marginalized communities. The barriers may be more hidden, but they are no less powerful. Outdated curriculums are just the beginning. Underfunded schools, overcrowded classrooms, and a lack of resources are all part of a larger strategy to maintain inequality. Consider the school-to-prison pipeline. Black boys are punished at disproportionate rates for minor infractions, often suspended or expelled for offenses that would receive a slap on the wrist elsewhere. Once they're removed from the classroom, their chances of succeeding shrink dramatically, and the criminal justice system is waiting for them. It's not an accident. The system is designed to limit their progress. This doesn't stop with education. It's a broader societal issue. We've built a world where certain communities are kept at the edge of their limits. Poverty, systemic racism, and economic inequality create barriers that keep people from thriving. We tell people that hard work alone will get them through, but we don't tell them about the structural walls that have been built around them. If the system is set up against you, how can you break through it? Reprogramming the mind and breaking free. Recognizing the barriers is the first step. But knowing they exist is not enough. You have to actively break through them. This is what Pushback Beyond the 120 is about. It's about reprogramming your mind to see that these limits are artificial and that you can go further. But to do that, you have to challenge everything you've been taught to believe. You've been told that you're only capable of so much. You've been shown a version of your life and your history that limits you. But when you start to question that narrative, everything changes. In my classroom, I wasn't just trying to teach my students a different version of history. I was trying to teach them how to think critically about the world they lived in. I wanted them to see that their experiences, their struggles, and their triumphs were part of a larger story, a story they could rewrite. That's how you break through the 120, by questioning the narratives that have been handed to you and seeking the truth for yourself. But it's not easy. The system will resist. Just as the administration resisted my attempts to introduce new materials into the classroom, the broader system resists change. But that resistance is a sign that you're on the right path. The resistance you face is not a reason to stop. It's a reason to push harder. Breaking through the system's limitations. The limits placed on us are not real. They're designed to make sure that we never break free. But once you recognize the game, once you see the way the system works, you realize that you don't have to accept it. You can go beyond the 120. Think about the history of progress. Every major social movement, from civil rights to women's suffrage to the fight for LGBTQ+ rights, faced resistance. Those in power will always resist change. But that resistance is not a sign of failure. It's a sign that you're pushing in the right direction. What walls are keeping you from moving forward? What barriers have you accepted as truth, without questioning where they came from? Pushing beyond the 120 is not just about working harder. It's about understanding the forces that are holding you back and breaking through them. It's about rethinking everything you've been told about who you are and what you're capable of. It's about reclaiming your narrative and deciding for yourself what your future looks like. At the end of the day, the limits you face are not permanent. They're there to be broken. Whether it's in education, in your career, or in society at large, the barriers that have been placed in front of you are not reflective of your true potential. You have the power to push beyond them. The question is, will you? Will you accept the limits that have been placed on you? Or will you break through? Will you settle for the version of your life that others have written? Or will you take control of your own story? The choice is yours. The power is yours. Thank you for watching and subscribe to stay aware of more valuable content.